Welcome back to the Paranormal Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. Every season, I include one episode dedicated to the skeptical side of things. It's important as skeptical believers to fairly question the things we learn about the paranormal. It's important that we hold space for thoroughly trying to understand the mysterious from our physical understanding of the world before we have no other option but to accept that what we are witnessing or experiencing is something a bit more inexplicable. I usually do these skeptical takes alone, but today I have some help from a true skeptic, a professional skeptic, if you will, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy the education in properly applied skepticism that today's guest brings. Before introducing my guest, today's episode is brought to you by Manscaped. Ladies, are you ready to make the men in your life beach ready and turn their grooming game up a notch? This summer, give the gift of the Beard Hedger Pro Kit from Manscaped. With this game-changing tool, they can shape their beards like true beach babes and make heads turn wherever they go. Visit manscaped.com, use code PNG, and enjoy 20% off and free shipping. Surprise your favorite guy with the ultimate grooming upgrade and show them some love with Manscaped. I appreciate and prefer a nicely groomed beard. It can be an incredibly important part of one's appearance. And it's a calling card of sorts to a person's character. It speaks to having attention to detail, prioritizing of self-care and hygiene. The Beard Hedger Pro Kit provides everything he will need to achieve optimal grooming status. The tools and formulas included make it so easy for him to take control over his style and appearance, and gives him options to achieve his favorite looks and feel his best self. The Pro Beard Kit also comes with 3 gifts: a beard brush, comb, and scissors to ensure that his beard is always ready to impress. It is time to help him say goodbye to his stubble troubles. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code PNG at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code PNG. Manscaped Beard Hedger. 1 stroke, 1 guard, 20 lengths. At the Oregon Ghost Conference this year, I attended a course called Properly Applied Skepticism and Paranormal Research. The education was awesome and riveting, and when the class concluded, I knew I had to ask the instructor to come on the show and share his knowledge with us. Thankfully, he said yes. Dr. James Nelson has a background in clinical social work, science, and research. He previously co-founded a paranormal research group and currently consults in a skeptical capacity for various paranormal investigative teams in the Portland, Oregon area. He also works with and is the co-founder of the Portland Ghostbusters, which is a cosplay group that attends and supports numerous charity events and conventions. He applies the scientific method and a grounded logic when approaching claims of the supernatural, and joins us to share how we all can more properly apply a healthy skepticism in our own quest for answers. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. James Nelson. We met at the Oregon Ghost Conference just a couple of months ago. I took your awesome class, Properly Applied Skepticism and Paranormal Research, and it was very illuminating, very enlightening. So I thought that would be very enjoyable and important for my audience, an audience of skeptical believers, to hear from you. So how is the response from that class? I was curious when I took it, just from the paranormal community in general. What's the response been like?
It's been a pretty decent response. I think a lot of people like it. I've never had anyone come right out and be openly hostile about it. I have had people when I've given this as a lecture at the end have come up with basically challenging me on some of my my skepticism. And I've been able to use that as sort of a learning opportunity for like, hey, well, we've just been discussing this, so let's apply some of these critical thinking skills to this claim that you've made. Um, so it's been fairly positive, although I will say it's not one of the more popular classes at the ghost conferences, and I get it. I people want to come to ghost conferences to talk about spooky things, and they want to learn how equipment works, and they want to, go on a ghost hunt, and coming to listen to some guy talk about how, hey, maybe these things you're experiencing aren't what you think they are is probably kind of a buzzkill.
Yeah, well, you know what? That is unfortunate to learn. As far as like my own experience just in this show, maybe it's just because that's the type of people that I attract. My experience has been talking with various paranormal investigators and researchers that they do try to approach things skeptically first because
Mhm.
they want good evidence. But from what I'm understanding is most investigators, most researchers don't want to engage with skeptics. They don't want to
Mhm.
do it. Why? I mean, why is that in general, and why should they do so?
So why they don't want to engage with skeptics, there's a bunch of reasons. And I have my own thoughts on that. I think for a lot of people, um, we have sort of an innate desire to not have people tell us that we're wrong or that we could be wrong. And I want to qualify that because I've never come out and said to somebody, "Hey, you're wrong about this. What you told me that you've experienced, you're just flat out wrong." Um, that's would not be a very skeptical approach. But with the paranormal, there's a lot of emotional things attached, and you'll have to forgive me. I'm getting some allergies, so my I got a tickle in my throat.
That's okay. Take your time.
Um, a lot of people don't want to think of the possibility that there's nothing after this life, and um, they get comfort from the idea that our spirits will live on after death. And when somebody comes along and says, I don't think that's true, and I don't think you have a good reason for believing that, there's kind of a gut reaction to push back on.
Hmm.
I think there's another reason, and that is at least when I first started getting into paranormal research, um, it was kind of the frontier of science, I guess, in terms of um, um, amateur researchers.
Okay. Okay.
So there were basically it was, hey, you can come up, do do science in quotes, and make your own theories, and you can't be wrong because there are no experts. And so having somebody basically say, okay, that's not true. You can be wrong, and there are people with expertise in this. Um, whether we want to debate that there are people who have expertise in the paranormal, but there are certainly people who have expertise in areas of science that cross over into what would be paranormal research, and there's not a whole lot of desire to listen to them. And again, that I think that comes back to I don't want somebody telling me I'm wrong.
Hmm. Hmm. Like that emotional aspect to it.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really important to point out. Another thing I want to point out here at the beginning, when we are talking about healthy skepticism in regards to something like the paranormal, what does that mean? Because I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding about what that
Yeah.
actually means. Like if you take somebody like Joe Nickel, you immediately think, oh, skeptic, total skeptic. Well, he calls himself a paranormal investigator.
Hmm.
He just has not found anything to prove that anything exists yet. So what
Yeah.
is, in basic terms, what are we actually talking about here as a skeptic? What does that mean?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Joe Nickell. He's actually one of my favorite researchers and authors. Highly recommend his books. Um, so I think people believe that skepticism is this smug idea that I'm right and you're wrong. And I think that gets around because there are a lot of skeptics who behave that way. And it's kind of part of the reason I put this together is I wanted to sort of reframe the view of skeptics in the paranormal community, that they aren't these smug people going like ghosts don't exist and you're stupid for thinking that. I want them to be like, oh, you believe that ghosts exist. That's fascinating. Why do you think that? What brought you to that conclusion? And then you can listen to their stories and you can dig deeper and you can ask, some pointed questions like what, depending on the experience, why did that convince you that ghosts are real? It's kind of like with orbs, which we'll probably get into later because that's something that I usually talk about, and if anything is going to make people mad, it's that. But like, even if you convince me 100% that you saw an orb with your um your naked eye and it was doing all sorts of things like loop-de-loops and flying over a field at midnight, how have you concluded that that is a spirit of a deceased person?
Right, right. You need to apply the scientific method, some kind of
Mhm.
method to actually get that
Mhm.
verifiable proof. And that's something I really appreciated about the course, was how finely you broke down all of these aspects to consider in this
Mhm.
whole process. Like you talked about the null hypothesis, alternative
Mhm.
hypotheses. You talked about, actually, I wanted to explore this with you,
Mhm.
burden of proof.
Mhm.
We all think we know what that means
Mhm.
and where that applies. What, for my listeners' sake, what is burden of proof, and who holds that?
The burden of proof is held by the person who makes the claim.
Hmm.
So if I were to say ghosts don't exist, I have adopted a burden of proof that I would need to demonstrate, which I don't believe I could do that. I couldn't give you evidence that says, yeah, for 100% ghosts don't exist. I think there is a lot that points to most paranormal instances being something natural that we don't understand, like that maybe that is understood by the greater scientific community, but individually we don't understand, so we misinterpret it. So I'm very careful about what I say because I try not to, when having a discussion, adopt a burden of proof.
Hmm.
And it's not because I mean, my personal philosophy on this is I don't know if ghosts exist. I don't know if there's life after death. Let's find out. Um, the people who say, "Oh yeah, there's definitely ghosts. They definitely exist," is, that's where you say, "Okay, cool. Ghosts exist. How did you make that determination?" Um, and again, I think how we say it, how we ask these questions is going to go a long way to building those bridges because I, despite me saying I try not to be smug, I realize the way I said it, hey, cool, tell me why you think that,
Hmm.
kind of comes off as smug and superior. And I think that as a skeptic, I try to be cognizant of the fact that how I am asking these questions is going to impact how uh, people take the information that I'm trying to partake or to give out.
Right, right. And it's hard because on the believer side of
Mhm.
this, there is still a need to be open-minded to
Mhm.
the idea that it might not be a ghost. It might be something totally explainable. You also talked about something really interesting, because I have personally used this in my life, and I think maybe I'm not understanding it, but it comes in when with burden of proof, sort of. Occam's razor and
Yes.
Hitchens razor. Hitchens razor. Is that after Christopher Hitchens?
Yes.
Okay, I love him. I love him.
So Occam's razor is often misquoted as the simplest solution is most likely the correct one. And the problem with that quote is the simplest solution is magic.
Okay.
It is the correct way of using Occam's razor, and I believe it's also called the law of parsimony, is you use the razor to slice off the unneeded assumptions. Which is where that comes from. So it is the answer with the fewest assumptions that you have to make is most likely. It doesn't mean it is the correct one. It is just more likely to be correct than it is not. So let's say you're in an investigation and you hear a thump on the floor above you, and you know there's nobody up there, and you say that was a ghost. Okay. Well, you're got to make a lot of assumptions right off the bat. You're assuming that it's a ghost, and that assumption brings its own assumptions of that when there's something about people that lives on after death that either is anchored to a property or can move around freely, and that it can interact with the environment in such a way that it would be able to make noise. So you're already at least 4 assumptions deep into that. And it could be something like, did something hit the roof? Or maybe somebody got up there without us noticing it, which, by the way, happens in investigations way more than I think a lot of people like to admit. And I can't remember if I gave this example in the class that I took, but I know I gave it in a lecture. One of the first investigations I went on, one of the investigators brought a Scrabble set because there have been some reported successes with like setting it up in a room, closing off the room, coming back a few hours later, and then words have been spelled out in the Scrabble tiles. And so they set it up in the basement. There was a lot of history to this place. Somebody had been murdered there. We knew the name of the murderer. Everybody, like, the investigation was not run properly in terms of we were given all the backstory prior to going in. So I went down to the basement to check on things, and I looked at the board, and there was a name clear as day spelled out in the tiles, and it was the name of the person who had murdered somebody there. And I called. I was really excited. I called up on the walkie-talkie and was like, "Excuse me." I was like, "Hey, we just saw that there was a name spelled out down here. Was anybody else down here?" And after like a minute, we heard like, "Oh yeah, somebody said they went down there and they spelled out the name to try to like goose the spirit into."
Oh.
So, and that was like my first thought at that point was, oh, it was a ghost. When it turns out that like, oh no, it was somebody who had moved it around. That actually, takes the fewest assumptions that somebody did it themselves. So when using Occam's razor, you want to just try to excise the assumptions that you don't need or that you can't demonstrate. And then Hitchens' razor just states that whatever is presented without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And
okay.
that goes, I think, more to wanting a better quality of evidence and research from researchers. And that means that, you gotta make sure you're getting good stuff. If you want people to take you seriously, you can't bring in like a garbled audio track that doesn't sound like anything and be like, yeah, that's proof. That's proof right there. One of the things that the TV shows do is when they play the audio track, they'll put the what they think it says at the same time. And that's kind of like a little trick of the brain, is that when you hear the garbled message and you see what they think it says, your ears will sort of interpret it as, oh yeah, that's exactly what it says. If before they play it, you close your eyes so you don't see that, that will give you a much more objective way of listening to the sound clip. And every time I've done that, especially when I'm watching the TV shows, I don't hear what they're claiming was said. So
Okay.
I shouldn't
That's
say every time. There are a few times that I'm like, oh yeah, that was crystal clear,
yeah.
and I would want to make sure that there was nobody else down there before I put that out as, yes, this is absolutely a paranormal event.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually have a couple of really good friends that they're very much into EVPs,
Mm-hmm.
and they do not under any circumstance want to be front loaded with what
Mm-hmm.
the person who captured it thinks it
Mm-hmm.
says.
Mm-hmm.
That's and I think that should go across the board. That's just a smart way to do it, and
Yeah.
remove the confirmation bias from it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the proper way to do it. Well, on that note, on the note of evidence and getting good evidence,
Mm-hmm.
um, we rely on certain pieces of equipment to
Mm-hmm.
get that evidence, something verifiable that we can match up with something else, possibly. That's how I
Mm-hmm.
think of equipment. I wouldn't trust just the reading of one single thing. It's got to coincide with something else if I were in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But you enlightened me to a couple of pieces of equipment that I just didn't really think about before. I haven't used them personally, but the K2 meter
Oh
and
yes.
the and the EMF reader. What's wrong with those?
So I'll start with the EMF meters. There's nothing per se wrong with EMF meters. The problem is that people don't know how to properly utilize them.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the times, and this is something that the TV shows did, is that you'll see them walking around using them like a PKE meter from Ghostbusters. Uh, they're just like scanning everything, taking readings, and um, they're looking for spikes in the electromagnetic field. So there are a couple things wrong with this. Um, First off, the first paranormal investigators to use EMF meters were looking for correlations. They'd had a theory that there might be a disturbance in the electromagnetic field when an event was taking place. So they weren't walking around with EMF meters, and the meters they were using at the time were tri-field. Um, and the tri-field natural meter is like so sensitive that you can't walk around like a PKE meter. It would be going off all the time. So they would put it down, and basically if they heard a noise, if they saw had a psychic would give information, they would see if the dial was jumping around, and if it was, they would say, okay, seems to be a correlation between a disturbance in the EMF field and whatever this is that just happened. And somewhere along the line, it became ghosts give off EMF. Everything is made of energy, so therefore ghosts would be made of energy. Therefore, um, therefore the meter should pick it up. And that's just not the case. Now, what people need to do is, if they're using a meter, they need to like basically get a baseline for each room, so that if they go through it again and they notice, oh, hey, it's above this, they can mark it down and then dig a little deeper to see like, hey, did somebody snap on the lights? Did some machinery kick on? It's not a ghost meter, despite the fact that there is a brand of cell sensor that is marketed as a ghost meter. It is one of the most hilarious pieces of equipment I have seen. It came with an instruction manual that would tell you that each reading would correlate to the age of the ghost, but there was nothing that would be like, how did you determine this? So it really was people realizing, hey, people like technology, people like ghost hunting. I can buy these cheapo cell meters, slap a label on it, type up some pseudoscientific nonsense to package with it, and sell like a $5 meter for 50, $60, and people will buy it. So the issue with EMF meters are that people aren't using them properly.
Okay.
They're not ghost detectors. They are detecting disturbances in the electromagnetic field. And so once people understand that's what the meters are doing, you can kind of cut down on a lot of this wandering from room to room, sweeping everything.
Oh, okay. Okay. So they're not bad to use, but we are
No,
misusing them, and if we use them as
yeah,
correlations with other things, that's
yeah.
the proper way to use it. Okay. Okay. All right.
That's basically what you're looking for, is that if there's an event happens, you want to correlate it with as many data points as you can, such as EMF, temperature, things like that. The K2 is probably one of the most famous and infamous pieces of equipment. Prior to now, it made its debut as a piece of paranormal equipment on the TV show Ghost Hunters in the mid 2000s. And I remember the episode. I believe it was they were investigating one of the Manson family murders that was supposed to, I think it was Sharon Tate. And one of the investigators brought it along as a method of communication. And these were, prior to that show, you could pick these up for like $1, maybe
Mm-hmm.
between $1 and $5. They were awful. Um, Electricians wouldn't use them, and they were made specifically for electricians, but they were just like, we're not getting, these aren't sensitive enough. That the dial is just multicolored LEDs, so we're not getting accurate readings off of them. They're garbage. Um, and then after the show, all the investigators wanted one, and they went from $5 to $75, and that was back before they'd fixed the switch on them. Because originally, when you use them, you'd have to keep the switch depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they got around it on the show was they took like a nickel and stuck it in the switch to keep it on all the time. So you're paying, you know, 10 times the price for something that doesn't work the way you really want it to work. But it's got flashing lights. It's got colorful flashing lights. So people loved it. I played around with the K2 a few years ago, and I was doing an investigation, and again, they were using it the night before, and they were like, "Oh, look, this is there's a spot of hovering EMF here in the middle of the room." And so the next morning, I borrowed the K2 meter and I went back and I found the spot again. It's like, okay, well, it's still there. And I traced using the meter sort of like where it was coming from, and I noticed it was getting stronger towards the wall. And there was a tide clock on the wall that was battery operated, and apparently that was giving off enough EMF to get the meter to go off like that. So yeah, it is not a good meter. I think most people just really like it because it's got lights, and It's handheld. It's like palm size, so you can walk around and act like you're a Ghostbuster, I guess.
Well,
Taking,
they're
yeah,
fun. They're fun looking, you know. They're
yeah,
entertaining. Yeah, I haven't used the K2 meter myself, but yeah, I've seen them a lot on the
they
shows.
they are fun looking. They're just garbage meters. So
Would
there's
you?
there's much better pieces of equipment to invest your money in.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm glad you said that. So is if the K2 meter is
Mhm.
the garbage equipment in your opinion, what's the best one that we could be using?
The best one is probably going to be a tri-field meter.
Okay.
Those are expensive, but those are professionally calibrated. So they are your these are the things that professional electricians are going to be buying.
Okay.
Um, and you're getting they're very fine tuned for the work that they're used for, which means that they're pretty decent to use in the field. But they are expensive. So somebody on more of a budget, I would recommend the Mel meters. Um, I like them for a few reasons. They're not as they're not as professional because they are made with paranormal research in mind. But the readings are fairly accurate off of it. They all come with a built-in red lens flashlight as well, so you don't have to worry about carrying around a flashlight with you. And then they usually have some secondary functionality. Well, actually, the secondary functionality would be they all have uh, a temperature gauge. It's an air probe temperature gauge. And then they'll have a tertiary functionality. So the one that I have has the a REM pod built into it, um, which I have used on investigations, and I can say that I have not gotten great results from that,
Okay.
except for like maybe negative results. But the EMF meter itself and the temperature gauge are really great for the money that you're spending.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting information. Thank you. You know what? We are going to move on, but you said something at the beginning of the episode.
Mhm.
I do want to hear from you about it. Talk about orbs. Tell us, make us mad.
Okay, orbs are garbage,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I'll expand on that.
Okay, please.
That's just to get people mad. The orbs are very poor evidence. Orbs really came about in the mid to late 90s when digital photography was taking off. And I don't know if you remember like the old digital cameras of like the mid 90s.
Hmm.
They were like the size of a Polaroid and you would have to stick a whole floppy disk in them.
Right.
So you can imagine like how big those floppy disks were. Like, 3, 4 megabytes, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, maybe you had like 20 megabytes on them. Still, the quality of those photographs is very low. So any close lens contamination to the camera, which could be dust, it could be moisture. What happens is, especially if you're using a flash, the flash will bounce off whatever that contamination is, and it's inside. I believe it's called. I'll have to look this up, but when I was studying this, I believe they called it the cone of confusion, which is if it's close enough to the lens, it's going to be blurry.
Okay.
So you have um, these pieces of dust that maybe you wouldn't see if you didn't have the flash. The flash fires, it illuminates the dust, but they're so close to the lens that the lens can't focus on it. So you just got these blobs of light. And then people will say, well, yeah, but there's different colors. Like Okay, that's going to depend on what you're nearby, because the light of the flash will be reflecting off of surfaces. So if you're near like a green surface, then the orb might appear to be tinted green. Um, I have not seen. I have seen interesting orb photos. I have not seen anything compelling me to say, "Oh yeah, that's a spirit."
Okay. What's your go-to explanation if you see a video of something that is moving erratically?
It's dust,
Yeah,
most
okay.
likely.
Okay.
Depending on where it is. I mean, if it's inside, I would say, look, if unless you can tell me for a fact that there were no air currents in that house, or there was no fan that turned on, like which I don't know how you would be able to do that, because air is never just stagnant. It's
Hmm.
always moving somewhat, and it doesn't take much to get dust particles moving. So you could be, walking through the house, an old house, and stirring up all this dust, and the cameras can be picking it up. So again, this is if the claim is the orb is paranormal, then the person making that claim um, needs to back that up with evidence. Just having them say it's paranormal because I can't explain it is not a good explanation.
Okay. Okay. I agree with that. Absolutely. Well, let's let's move on to something I wanted to ask you about. I don't think we talked about it when we were in
Mhm.
the conference, but you must have, and you've probably already been asked this so many times in all of this consulting work, all of
Mhm.
this investigation, you must have had experiences with things that you yourself could not explain.
So honestly, I have, but not while consulting.
Oh, okay.
Um, this was about, I think, over 20 years ago, when I was a student at Portland State University, and I was house sitting for some friends. And you know, I, I was staying in their house. It was, I'm in my early 20s, so it's like, ah, man, I can stay up as late as I want. I can watch whatever shows I want. Um, and they had a really, really nice house too. So it's just kind of like, oh, this is perfect for just, me time. So I used to watch the show Crossing Over at night before bed, and that might have something to do with that. But I have this very vivid recollection. I finished watching the TV. It was probably around midnight. I turned off the TV. I turned off the lights, and I'm kind of in that that space between asleep and awake.
Hmm.
And it was summer, so I had the window in the bathroom open. But I hear this loud cough, and it sounds like it's coming right next to the bed, right next to and above me. So it sounded like somebody was standing next to the bed watching me, and they just let out a cough. So my eyes shot up, uh, shot open, turned on the lights, nobody there. But then I could hear some noise coming from the street, and I was like, well, maybe somebody coughed outside. But even as I said that, I'm like, there's no way. That was right here. It was right next to me. But I wasn't really afraid. So it was kind of like, all right, back to sleep.
Right.
And I told my mom about that, and she was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And she knew that the people I was house sitting for too. So I wasn't going to tell anyone else about that. And my mom told the people that I house sit for, and the wife said, "Oh, that's Mr. Johnson." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, we bought the house like in the mid 70s, and her husband was an architect, and so they were just like, we're gonna totally revamp the house, and they did. It was this sort of I think Victorian style house, but they just completely modernized it. And while they were doing that, she said there was some activity. And the story she told that really stuck with me is she woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and she said she's walking down the hall and she just like runs smack into somebody. And it was just like it was clear enough, and but she said she was really tired, so she just said, "Oh, excuse me," stepped to the side, kept going, went like 5 steps, and then stopped and went, "What?" And then like looked down the hallway and there was nobody there. And I forget if she had like spoken to the people they bought the house from. I think she had, and they said, "Oh, our father, lived in this house for most of his life, and he died in a care center in the early to mid 70s." So it's, maybe it's him. Yeah. And so one day in the middle of the day there was some activity was happening. I don't know, remember what it was. Like pots fell off the shelf, and she said she just got mad, and she stood in the kitchen and said to this ghost, or the spirit, whatever, like, this is our house now, and you can't be doing this anymore. You got to move on, or don't move on, but you can't stay here, sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And basically from that point on, it was very rare that they would get any more paranormal activity, to the point where I think she'd forgotten about it until, excuse me, until I mentioned it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, well, with an experience like this, and is that does that like feed your current day kind of, well, ghosts could be real, but that kind of feeling about it? Does it feed that?
Kind of. I have no explanation for it.
Okay.
I can't say for certain that, like, oh yeah, that was a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit also that, human memory is very fragile. So I can't even truthfully say, I remember it happening exactly this way. This is what happened. Um, I can tell you that, from my recollection, that's what it sounded like, and that was my reaction to it, and it was clearly enough that I told somebody. Um, but I never had anything like that again. I've never really had an experience while investigating, which has been kind of disappointing, because I've gone on investigations that have been sold to me as like, oh yeah, this is ongoing. Like every night something's happening, and I go there, and with a team, and it's just like nothing.
Okay.
And that's, or like if it is something, it is something that's so underwhelming. I just feel like I don't know how I can get excited about this, or even say that, yeah, that's a ghost. It's just, comes across like, um, I don't know, like, I know that people will sort of amp themselves up when they're getting excited over something, and sometimes they will take dubious evidence to mean more than it should.
Okay. Okay. Why, final question on this, and then
Mhm.
I'll move on. Why continue to search? Why do you continue to do this work? What's so exciting?
Well, I think it's exciting that there's always stories,
Hmm.
and the stories are exciting, and people are having experiences. And I think that as long as we're looking for answers, we're doing science that way. Um, I'm not like as passionate for like going out and doing the overnight investigations as I was when I was younger. Um, and I think that's largely because I haven't found anything that tells me like, oh yeah, that's exactly what, that's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
So, why do it? I think for me, I do the conferences because I think they're fun. But also I really want to educate people.
Hmm.
I want people to better, think differently about investigation, and think differently about evidence, and think differently about what they're doing in the field. Um, because really, so there's an old joke in the field of parapsychology. It says, if you're an academic and you want to commit career suicide, study parapsychology. If you're a parapsychologist and you want to commit career suicide, study the survival hypothesis. Um, a lot of academics don't study these things, even in parapsychology, and
Hmm.
partially that's because you can't you can't do it in a laboratory. We haven't been able to get a ghost to come into a laboratory to run tests on. Um, a lot of other aspects of parapsychology we can run tests on. We can run tests um, on ESP in the laboratory. We can run tests on psychokinesis in the laboratory. But survival is something that we can really only test for in the field. And field work is fraught with so much uncertainty because you can't control the environment. And I want people to know that because there's so much uncertainty in field work, that it is incumbent upon them to really do what they can to get the best evidence and present the best evidence. And that means going through the things that they've collected. And even if it might impress them, they need to ask questions like, but is this really impressive? Is this really something that if I show it to somebody else who may not believe in the paranormal, um, would they be convinced by this? Would they at least say, well, that's interesting. I still don't believe in ghosts, but hey, that's something that I'd like to know more on.
Okay. Okay. Uh, just so fascinating. Such good information. I really appreciate it. I wanted to give a second to just
Mhm.
shine a light on the Portland Ghostbusters. You also
Okay.
participate in that group. That is not a paranormal investigation group. It's so much more. Why don't you let my listeners know what you guys are all about?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're definitely not a paranormal investigation group. Although when we started out, we had a lot of people emailing us telling us their house was haunted. And I couldn't tell if they were joking or if they were serious. We've had a few people that were serious, and we just forward those on to the groups that we're familiar with. Um, it's a charity cosplay group, and it started in 2012. I started it with a buddy of mine who unfortunately is no longer living uh, in the United States. Well, I guess I should say, unfortunately for us. Fortunately for him, he got offered a job at Lego. As I think he's a designer now, and that's like been one of his passions. He was on was it Lego Masters a few years back.
Oh,
So
wow.
this was like a dream come true for him. So our loss is Lego's gain, and hopefully maybe we'll see some new Ghostbusters Legos coming out. Um, so we started in 2012, and it was just five of us. Um, and we started off just doing events like Rose City Comic Con, and we would do like a Halloween event. And we started growing, and when my wife and I were dating, I was telling her about this. She's from SoCal, and she's more of a sports aficionado than a nerd. And so when I told her that I did this, she was like, "Well, that's your thing, and I'm not going to have anything to do with that, and that's fine. You just have fun." And we were talking about wanting to get into charity, and my wife does a lot of charity work. So I was like, "Would you like to be our charity coordinator?" And she goes, "Yes, but I don't want to have to dress up." And I said, "Okay, you don't have to." And then she came to a few events, and she's like, "Okay, I think I want to dress up." So I took her to get a flight suit, and we got her a name patch and the no ghost patch and everything, and then she got a spirit Halloween pack about 5 years ago, and she's upgraded it a few times, and now she's got a custom spirit pack from one of our members who does that professionally. She customizes the spirit packs. In fact, right now she is out at an event, um, and I can't remember what it is. Walk to End Melanoma or something.
Hmm.
Um, because and I'm doing the podcast, so I wasn't able to go to that. Um, but she's there with the team today. Um, and that has become most of what we do, our charity events. So we get our name out there that we will show up at events. We've got an ectomobile now. Um, we can bring the ecto, provided we have enough time and we're able to arrange transportation for it. And what we really want to do is just, excuse me, help people raise money for good causes. And
Hmm.
we have a few causes that we are sort of locked into. So we do work every year with the Lupus Foundation.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. The ecto. I actually was telling my listeners about that on one of the previous episodes following the conference. That was so exciting. That actually kicked off the whole weekend for me
Mhm.
because my hotel room was right across the street from the entrance there, and I saw the Ghostbusters car, that iconic car,
Mhm.
being towed up to the doors there, and I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh, Lee, look!" So it's very,
yeah,
very cool.
it is an amazing car.
Yeah.
We sort of hooked up with the guy who owns it last September, and it was synchronicity that we did so because like right after we got back from Rose City Comic Con, um, excuse me, my wife got a call from Sony Pictures, and they were filming a commercial for Vacasa in Portland. There's a private residence that used to be a firehouse in like the late 18, early 1900s, and they basically had rented this residence and transformed it into the firehouse. And it was only for October, and they were raffling off a 3-night stay at the end of the month. And they wanted the commercial for the commercial for that. They're like, we want gear, we want packs, um, we want the car. And so immediately she was, talking to our members like, we got it. They need proton packs there, whatever kind of gear you have. If you have a PKE meter or something, and whatever we didn't provide, they scratch built, and it was pretty amazing. So like in the basement, they'd built a an ecto containment unit,
Hmm.
and at the end of the month, after the event was over, they were just going to junk all that stuff. So
Oh,
we said,
crazy.
yeah, we said like if you're just going to throw it away, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And we ended up taking a lot of stuff out of there. We got the ecto containment unit, and we've modified it. Um, as it was on site, it was not very portable, and you could open it up, but you really couldn't do anything else with it. And now we've got it so that you can actually clean traps in it. And we took that to the Oregon Ghost Conference as well. But that's how we met the guy with the ecto. We were able to talk him into bringing it by for the event, or for the commercial shoot. And we even got to ride around in it in Northwest Portland, with the sirens going for the commercial shoot. It was amazing. Really a dream come true.
Oh, wow. Well, it was meant to be.
Yeah.
It all worked out really, really well. And I'm so glad because You guys, groups like yours, just doing the good work that you do for local charities and community events and all that, and just really bringing that focus, people's focus to important causes like that. And just really appreciate what you do. Listeners, please check out the Portland Ghostbusters. I'll be sure to put the Facebook page and any other information that you want down in the show notes.
Sure.
All right. Well, it is time now, sir, for final questions, final thoughts, and then we will close it out.
Sure.
All right. So, first one I got for you is, what is your paranormal guilty pleasure right now? It can be a show, piece of literature, or a topic.
I think it's Ghost Adventures is my guilty pleasure. And that's
Awesome.
just because I can't really take it seriously. It's just like I kind of want to like watching it just be like, you guys aren't real. And I remember the first time I ever watched an episode of Ghost Adventures, and I can't remember where they were, but they were like, we're going to show you how dark it is because we're not using any lights. We're just going to be walking around trying to find our way through this abandoned, asylum or something, looking through the little LED screens. And while they're trying to see where they're going through the night vision LED screens, you don't get a wide enough view of the corridor. And the lead guy stepped into a pile of garbage, and then he started doing like windmill arms and then fell flat on his face, broke the camera. And I just watching that and I had to laugh, and I was like, that ended exactly how I thought it was going to. Like when you tell me that you're going to do something foolish like this, it's like, well, somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah. Well, they are certainly entertaining. You can't fault them for that.
They are entertaining.
Yes. All right. Next one. What is the most misinterpreted aspect of skepticism or being a skeptic?
Probably, and I mentioned it before, I think the most misinterpreted aspect is that skeptics are smug know-it-alls. And I think there are a lot of people that come across that way who are skeptic. But if you're using skepticism properly, you shouldn't be a know-it-all, because part of skepticism is, I don't know. Can you demonstrate that? It's not you're wrong and I know that you're wrong. It's I don't know. That doesn't sound right. Tell me why you think that's the case. So I really I want people in the paranormal community to not be afraid of skeptics. Have them on your team. Talk with them, reach out to them, reach out to actual scientists. If you have something like, hey, we've got video of, a chair moving across the floor, and you don't know how it could possibly be done, talk to a physicist. Or better yet, talk to a magician. If you're looking for like how things can look spooky and paranormal, magicians will look at that, even if they might not have it right, but they'll can at least look at it and say, oh yeah, that's an easy effect to do. So I want people to like get outside of their comfort zone in talking to professionals, because that's really going to help increase the quality of the evidence.
All right, final one. Tell us about some of the commonly seen fallacies in paranormal research.
Okay, yeah. So probably the most common, and I don't want anyone to get offended by this, but it's called the argument to ignorance. And it's basically, it doesn't mean that you're ignorant. It means that what people do is they'll say like, I don't know how that could have happened, therefore ghosts. And it's like, that's not really an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, just because you don't know how it could have happened, that's not enough information for someone to then make a determination. It has an extension called the argument from personal incredulity, which really goes to, I just can't believe that a ghost didn't move that, or that there aren't such things as ghosts. And that is like that has more to do with belief than knowledge, but they go hand in hand, and you get that a lot with people, especially when they're looking at evidence. If somebody says, "What else could have done that?" You're talking, you're dealing with an argument from ignorance, which is to say, I probably don't necessarily want to call them out and say like that's an argument from ignorance, but just say like, I don't know what else could have moved it. Let's find out. Or I don't know what else could have moved that, but that doesn't mean it was a ghost. Let's, why do you think that? Not knowing what a cause is doesn't mean that the cause is paranormal.
Okay, true that. Dr. Nelson, where would you like to direct my listeners? Where can they follow you or learn more about your group?
Well, you can actually, if you want to know more about Portland Ghostbusters, it's portlandghostbusters.org is our website. We've got a lot of photographs, and we've got some news stories that we were a part of in that, as well as some videos. We did a video birthday card for a kid because it was in the middle of COVID and we couldn't go out to the birthday party. So we just, in an afternoon, put together a video clip for him. So check that out. In terms of me doing professional paranormal research, I don't have an online presence for that. I would just say keep an eye out for me at both Oregon Ghost Conference and Port Campbell Ghost Conference, because I go to those fairly frequently, and I'm usually presenting or teaching a class. Mostly what I do is consulting nowadays, so I don't really need a website for that.
Okay. And to close us out, what would you like to leave with my audience? Any final thoughts or piece of advice?
My final thought would be this, and that is, you don't need a degree to be a scientist. You need to have a passion for learning, for discovery, and the ability to think critically. And despite the fact that I think a lot of people get into paranormal research because they're like, oh, it's the frontier and nobody can tell me I'm wrong, which is not true, that we can all be scientists. We don't need to have a degree. We don't need to have a title. As long as we're asking questions and trying to get the best possible answer, that's really all that matters. And I would really encourage people to learn more about science, learn more about skepticism, and apply that to their paranormal research.
Dr. James H. Nelson, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for appearing on the show with me, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in once again. If you finish this episode feeling not in the least unhappy, feeling like, well, yeah, duh, congratulations, you skeptical believer, you. If you finished and are not so happy with it, look, I have seen some really intriguing photos of orbs, too. I took some, even, that are incredibly special to me. I see a face in one that is very special to me. And there's a whole circumstantial situation surrounding the taking of that photo that supports what I see in that light bubble. But I can still be happy to learn the other side of the argument and accept logical, sound reasoning. We should want to be challenged. We should want to stretch. That's the point. And it sure makes the remaining stuff that you cannot possibly explain all the more special, doesn't it? We are blazing the trail here now in these final days of the season, and I have a few special things in store for you guys before that finale lands. First up, we have one final guest joining us before our conclusion. Who could it possibly be? Better be somebody awesome, that's for dang sure. It is. It's totally somebody very awesome. So don't miss next week's show. Don't miss it. You'll be mad. Also, Paranorm Girl is about to hit a major milestone in its journey. The kind of milestone that makes a person look back on the journey and appreciate every single second of it. The 100th episode quickly approaches, so keep an ear out, folks. Better yet, keep an eye out, because I will be posting it to YouTube, because I got visuals to share, man. Show and tell, folks. Easy as pie ways to support the show. There are so many. Follow on the socials, and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Paranorm Girl Pod. You can also rate, review, and share the show with a friend. Another way to show support is by becoming a patron. I misspoke a couple episodes ago and said that you could do that for as little as $3 a month. That is incorrect. I recently added, and then promptly forgot, apparently, that I added a tier for folks who are interested in just checking out the extra content and the early access that you can only get over at patreon.com/paranormgirlpod. You can do that for as little as $1. With that, we will bring this episode to a close. That's a wrap. Until next time, stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.